At issue tonight, tariff reprieve. Donald Trump delays his trade war with Canada after speaking with Justin Trudeau. In exchange, the Prime Minister promises more border measures, including a fentanyl czar.
So this is positive, and it is progress. But at the same time, our work does not take proposed tariffs completely off the table. We will be engaging closely with the U.S. administration to underscore why tariffs hurt us all.
So how should Ottawa prepare for what might happen in less than 1 month? How should Canada take on the U.S. president? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Been wanting to talk to you guys since Saturday and then again on Monday, and here we are finally. There's a lot happening. I'm going to start with you tonight, Althia. What do you think of where we are now as we wait for what might come and what the government needs to be doing during this time?
Well, I don't actually think that much has changed from Saturday. The question really is, what are the goalposts? What can Canada offer Donald Trump in terms of an exit ramp? The purported reasons for the tariffs, which was the fentanyl crisis, that's what was written in the White House executive order, is where they managed to give Donald Trump a win on Monday. But what the standard for success is, I think remains unclear. The premiers were told on that call on Saturday that Howard Lubnick, the incoming Commerce Secretary, had told Dominic LeBlanc, the finance minister now, that if American deaths dropped, then the tariffs would drop. But what is the rate of success to avoid more tariffs in 30 days? That is still unclear. And the things that the government has pledged to do are things that actually take normally 30 days to set up, even longer, like all these working groups between government agencies and departments and the provinces and the territories. It's not even clear what this fentanyl czar is going to do. We're supposed to find that out tomorrow. So there's a lot of unknowns. The government actually thinks that this is not about the fentanyl crisis, that it is really about extorting financial means, attracting investment, more jobs in the United States, and a money grab tool. And so their strategy hasn't changed, which is just trying to make the case that the Americans will feel a lot more pain if they pursue the strategy going forward.
So given that they don't believe that, I'm not sure anyone believes it's really about fentanyl, but that there's this moving target, Chantal, how on earth do you, as a government, prepare for or try to prevent a tariff from going into place a month from now?
You do what you can. I think it's clear it's not about fentanyl. I'm looking at the April 1st deadline for reports on trade, and the government fully expects this to become about trade. But you cannot negotiate in the absence of a counterparty that tells you what the end game is. Yeah. I'm also not noticing, because it's become a pattern, that things happen on one day and then they get corrected or changed for a few days. That exit ramp for Donald Trump was always there, the border and fentanyl, and it got used. But it got used because the reality of what tariffs mean to a number of industries suddenly did not go down well in the U.S. The same thing happened with the Gaza. Let's build hotels and make it a nice place to go for tourism. So you can do what you are doing, but you cannot really map out a real strategy, except to work on things that Canadians can improve among themselves. And there are pluses here. I have never seen people go in grocery stores and be as mindful of what they're buying. Something happened in Canada this week. It's not going to go away. It doesn't solve the tariff issue, but it certainly sends a really strong message that Canadians are paying attention.
Andrew?
Well, to echo this point about the chaos in Washington, we've heard 5 different rationales for this. You hear different things from different people around in Trump's circle. Trump himself, is the epitome of mercurial, to say the least. And that would make it very difficult for anybody. It's hard to know what's on his mind, if anything's on his mind, except the will to power, the desire to dominate, which I think is more than policy, is really what drives Trump on a lot of fronts. I wouldn't say that about anybody else in political leadership, but it's pretty clearly that's a very important thing for him. So that bedevils things. I will say, if you want to know who's had a good week politically, I'm not usually the person who focuses on the politics of these things, but I think Justin Trudeau had a pretty good week. He gave a speech that was very well received on the night of the event. He brought in appropriately tough measures with the promise of more to come if they didn't get satisfaction. In the end, he got a deal with Trump to postpone it in exchange for basically 6 magic beans. And if you look at the polls, suddenly we're in a horse race. We've got a raft of polls now showing basically the Tories dropping at about 2 points a day. Latest poll has a gap of 13 points. It was 26 points, said all the polls 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So that adds interesting dynamics to all this. The Prime Minister looked prime ministerial for once.
And we'll talk about the Conservatives after the break to see how they're adjusting their strategy or how that might be changing the landscape. Chantal?
I think the Liberals have lucked into, and I'm not predicting an election outcome, but
Sure.
the kind of perfect trifecta. The Prime Minister is leaving, and no one is saying, despite that he's had a good week, that he should reconsider and stay.
Yeah.
But the leadership campaign features candidates, the leading candidates, Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, who fit the bill of what voters are looking for. People who are offering themselves to manage the Canada-US relationship. At the same time, and that's why I'm saying they really lucked in, most cabinet ministers that were in important portfolio have stayed on.
Yes.
So you don't get this impression of improvisation because they're all running for the leadership.
Yeah.
The 2 main characters are not in cabinet.
Yeah.
So, and I will give credit to both Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland. Neither of them is going around saying, if I were Justin Trudeau today, I would second guess him and do this and that.
Yeah.
And that really helps. I mean, at this point, they are putting their best show forward.
Yeah.
It will be a challenge for opposition parties. The polls are showing that.
Yeah, Chrystia Freeland was doing that up until this actually happened on Sunday. She was right behind the government approach. And that is sort of, Althea, speaking to what Chantal also said about the way Canadians are rallying, kind of the best tool that everyone has, right? Just try and stay united in terms of how this is going to unfold.
Okay, there's so many things here.
Yeah.
First of all, there were some people who saw the Saturday night speech and thought, see, Justin Trudeau's really good in a moment of crisis, and those were some of the Liberal backbenchers who supported him, who told their colleagues, hey, maybe we should stay with this guy after all. But to Chantal's point, I don't think anybody in the actual country is thinking that.
In the real world.
Okay, putting that aside,
Yes.
What happened over the weekend, and this is the thing that is to Justin Trudeau's strength, is the rallying everyone together, just like he did in the early days of COVID. This plays to his strength, and we saw that not only does it play to his strength, but it countered the Conservative message that we have been hearing for the last 2 years, which is that Canada is broken. When you have everybody united against a common enemy, which is Donald Trump down south, who is actually saying and musing aloud about economically pressuring Canada to become the 51st U.S. state, you have the sense across the political spectrum that actually Canada is not broken. Canada is a beautiful country that we should all work together to save. And yes, we have problems, but we can make them better. And we're all united to this common project. And that is why, and I know we're going to talk about the Conservatives, but that has been, I think, the key challenge and why we've seen the Conservative leader tried to pivot. We've seen 2 versions of a different message.
Don't say too much now.
In the last few days. Yeah, sorry, but it has been a monumental land shift that we've seen in the last week.
Last quick word to you, Andrew.
Just 2 things. First, Althea said it plays to his strength. I might say it compensates for a weakness. He tends to be over-dramatic most times. This was actually a dramatic moment. The tone actually met the occasion. The other thing is we have a short-term and a long-term thing. The short-term thing is, okay, what kind of tariffs do we put on? How much do we try to mollify Trump? But the longer-term objective and the issue is going to be, if the tariffs are here to stay, what kind of adjustments do we have to make? If we're now confronted with a very different neighbor to our south than we ever anticipated we face, we have much larger issues to confront than just that.
that issue, Conservative strategy. With the threat of tariffs taking center stage, Pierre Poilievre is changing parts of his pitch to Canadians.
We will have a prime minister that seals the border, protects our people, and puts Canada first. And most of all, we are going to put our country first, electing a common sense Conservative government that will put Canada first.
Here to break down some of Poilievre's messaging and the shift there, Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Chantal, why don't you start us off? Obviously, a pivot is needed. I know that there is a conversation inside the Conservative Party about how big a pivot, and we started to see that from Pierre Poilievre on Sunday, and then again around the issue of fentanyl and mandatory minimums. What does this tell you about what concerns they might have about where things are headed?
But that they're still struggling. If it's a pivot, it's not really totally well done, and I can understand why. Yeah. For one, it doesn't really work to accept Donald Trump's terms, fentanyl and the border, to say if only, because nobody, as we said previously, actually believes that these are real reasons. For two, there are scores of industries that are really worried in this country, the auto industry, and I could name 5 or 6 more about what's going to happen to them. And none of the speech about we're going to prosecute fentanyl pushers forever is addressing these concerns. So Mr. Poilievre is still trying to fit himself into the frame of this discussion. And why he's struggling, I believe, is that it is impossible to do that while blaming the people who are fighting on the front line, including Justin Trudeau. Because you will look, if you're shooting at what the government of Canada is doing at this point, you will look like you're shooting in the back of your own soldiers. But there are not 60,000 things that Pierre Poilievre can put forward that will be very different from what the premiers and the prime minister cobbled together. So it is a tough spot, and the only way to do this would be to look prime ministerial, forget about shooting at everyone and saying, you know, I'm seizing the moment. I'm not sure that by this time this is going to happen.
Andrew.
It's a difficult time, I think, for any opposition leader in the middle of a national crisis like this, where you want to be critical, but you don't want to look disloyal or unsupportive. I think he's got an additional issue that a lot of his base does think that the issue is fentanyl and does think the issue is immigration and thinks Donald Trump's got a point, or thinks that we're being too critical of him and we should cut a deal. You know, so he's in a difficult spot that way. The second batch of issues is, you know, all the things he was going to run on, the carbon tax, Justin Trudeau have disappeared, and now he's suddenly in the middle of something which he hadn't planned for, hadn't gamed out, and that would be disorienting. Thirdly, his natural demeanor and tone is attack dog. It's not prime ministerial. This is a moment when, as Chantal said, it would be probably ripe to try to look a little more prime ministerial. Some of us have been suggesting that for some time, but particularly now. And the last point I'll make is, summing all that together, he hasn't looked good. Talking about suddenly saying we should send troops to the border, or suddenly come out and saying we should have life penalties for anybody who's peddling fentanyl. It's looked jittery. It's looked over the top. It has not looked calm, cool, and collected. Yeah,
Althia.
I agree with most of what Andrew said, actually. I do think we did see a pivot this week, though. On Sunday, the Conservative leader had a press conference, and I had to listen to it again because he actually said, I agree with him, like I agree with the Prime Minister, when he came out in support for retaliatory tariffs. And you saw on social media this backlash from Conservatives angry at Donald Trump. Like they can almost taste the victories. It's just right there. They were weeks away from claiming the top prize, and then Donald Trump just threw all their plans in disarray. And what is happening, and Andrew touched on it, is that there is disagreement within like the big C, small c Conservative tent. You have folks like Doug Ford in Ontario who believe you need to talk tough and make the case and fight Donald Trump and, you know, take the fight to him. And then you have other people like Daniel Smith who believe well, the president has a point, and we should fix the drug crisis in the country, and we should peg this on Justin Trudeau. And you have seen him pivot to the version that he is more comfortable with, which is everything is Justin Trudeau's fault, and now it's Mark Carney's fault, because apparently Mark Carney has been here for the last 9 years and is responsible for all the ills plaguing us too. So that has been very interesting. What it tells me, though, is that they're worried about their own members, because this is not a growth strategy. And so we'll see what we've seen a lot of rolling polls and see if the decline is even further in the days and weeks to come.
I know you want in, Chantal, but I did want to just say, like, the issue of like patriotism in the country, I think really does change a lot of the landscape for the Bloc Québécois too, and we can talk about that more another time. But it really does make it very difficult to go after the government on anything.
Well, you see a You see a poll on Bloomberg today that shows that the majority of Albertans believe, despite opposition from Daniel Smith, the premier, that yes, we should, if it comes to that, use energy as a tool in a trade war. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it tells you a lot about how people feel. You see it in Quebec, where it's really amazing to watch people. You don't need to criticize Mark Carney's French. They're already defending it. And you have a poll today that shows that Mark Carney, well, one, that the Liberals are up in Quebec and doing better than they have in months. But if you put Mark Carney's name in there, then the Liberals are, 14, 16 points ahead of the Bloc Québécois.
Yeah, I mean,
but,
incredible.
I'm not saying... I'm not saying that's going to hold.
No,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But
this is where we're at. And when you talk about Doug Ford's approach versus Daniel Smith, the last time I looked, it's easy for the Conservatives to win or keep Alberta, but they can't form government without winning Ontario.
That's right. Yeah. Andrew,
You would think, though, that patriotism would be a Conservative card they could play, especially against this Prime Minister, who has, the perception certainly has spent the last 9 years running down the country, refusing to fly the flag, et cetera. Maybe some of those criticisms are unfair, but I think that's definitely the reputation he's attracted. And so at a moment like this, you'd think a Conservative leader would be able to stand up, if only by example, and pluck at the heartstrings of the country.
Yeah. 20 seconds, Althia.
I think another challenge for the Conservative leader is if the tariffs are imposed, what response will Canadians want? Because his platform, Pierre Poilievre's platform for the last 2 years has been this pledge that for every $1 of spending, there would be $1 of cut. If you're going into a scenario where you want to send people direct payments that the country needs a caregiver in chief, can Pierre Poilievre fit that role? I think that's another challenge that's possibly on the horizon for them.
At issue, bringing back Parliament. Opposition leaders say new legislation is needed immediately to deal with Trump's threats.
We must recall Parliament now and put Liberal Party power struggles aside.
Here to discuss whether the House should come back and is needed to respond to Donald Trump, Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Should we just give the whole 5 minutes to Andrew? We could do that. We will let Andrew start anyway.
Brief.
Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
We're done for the evening.
Andrew, do you think that this is actually needed right now? And Would it be fair for the government to say, you want to bring back Parliament? Great. There's a whole bunch of things we can do, but you have to commit to not forcing an election for X amount of time.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
You don't own the job of Prime Minister. You don't have a bargaining chip to play of, I'm only going to meet Parliament, I'm only going to submit myself to the people's elected representatives if you give me some guarantee that I get to hold on to power. You only have that power because Parliament gives it to you, because you have the confidence of the House. If you don't think you have the confidence of the House, all the more reason you should be meeting it rather than clinging to power and refusing to meet it. So it is not up to him to be able to strike those sorts of bargains. It seems to be not if we take Parliament seriously. There's a long-term, as I talked earlier, there's a long-term problem and a short-term problem. In the short term, do we need Parliament to pass legislation? Not immediately, no. But we do have a national crisis in our hands, and if this is not the moment when we get together as a community, when our elected representatives get together to voice our fears, to thrash through what we should be doing, to reassure people, to ask questions of those who lead us, if Parliament's not for that kind of moment, then when is it for?
Yeah.
And so the notion that it should, in the middle of this absolute existential crisis, that the Parliament is shuttered, I think is appalling.
Though, Chantal, the Prime Minister has the right to prorogue. That is also part of his toolkit, if you will. And when he did it for reasons, yes, that were partisan, but also perhaps necessary, because remember, Parliament was deadlocked when we left. Chantal.
I don't think that he prorogued because Parliament was deadlocked. I think that he prorogued because it would give his party time to pick a new leader.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into should or shouldn't, because I don't like to be someone who's saying should or shouldn't. But I will say it's unlikely that Parliament will be recalled, because Donald Trump gave the Liberals an out from the pressure of bringing back Parliament. It's one thing to say we need legislation now, but with this 30 days, what is it now, 26, we don't know what we need legislation for.
Yeah.
So up to a point, the person who will decide whether Parliament comes back before an election is not going to be this Prime Minister. It's going to be a successor.
The next Prime
Now,
Minister,
you can agree on principle on all of the reasons why Parliament should come back. But I think a lot of Canadians also want to have a real choice in the next election, not a leaderless Liberal Party campaigning against Pierre Poilievre. So up to a point, I'm not convinced that the issue of bring Parliament now will take off anytime soon.
No, Althia.
Sadly, most Canadians do not care about whether or not Parliament is sitting. We ran the 2011 election on whether or not democratic norms were being respected, and nobody seemed to care at all. So we can talk about it, and I don't disagree with Andrew's points, and I don't disagree with Chantal's points. I will say, though, that I think a lot of Liberals are looking at what has happened in the last few weeks and thinking, like, wow, we're starving Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives of a platform on which to post new social media videos, on which to galvanize more fundraising.
Right.
Maybe we should have done this months ago.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And there's obviously
That's not a
reason.
Parliament at all, then.
No, I'm not saying that at
Who
all.
needs
I'm
it?
just
No.
saying, like, everybody's position on this issue is really hard to distinguish between what's principle and what's in their partisan advantage, because they're all arguing for what's in their partisan advantage.
Yes.
And sometimes that principle sides with what's in their interest, and sometimes it doesn't, and it doesn't really matter. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah. I also like Parliament, just for the record, Andrew. I just am also realistic about whether it's going to happen or not. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for this week. Thank you all so much. That is At Issue for this week. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks so much for watching.